So lately I'm getting a lot of requests on rebuilding the drive motors on the Bobcat track loaders, like the Bobcat T550, 595, T630, T650 style, but more specifically the 500 series Bobcat track loaders. I don't have any of the old style 550 or 595 motors, which would be like this. This is a Rexroth MCR-F style motor, and these motors here are the new Rexroth that you'll find in the newer Bobcat loaders, Rexroth MCR-T style motors. Now, a good thing about this video is that we're going to do a 595 motor today, but looking at a 595 versus a 650 motor, so between the 500 and 600 series loaders, you cannot tell the difference. You know, this is a 595 motor, this is a 650 motor. By looking at the outside, you cannot tell the difference. I mean, they're almost completely identical, just some different part numbers inside. Whereas the 700 and 800 series motor here is quite a bit larger. It's a distinct difference. You can tell by looking at it. We are going to do a 2-speed motor today. It's just you know, the housing's a little taller, a different distributor inside, and just a 2-speed spool. But other than that, the rest of the motor is exactly the same as a single speed. And I can show you the difference between the single speed housing and distributor once we get in there. So let's go ahead and tear down one of these, and we're going to troubleshoot it, find out what goes wrong with it, how to rebuild it, what it costs to rebuild it, and things to look for while you're inside. So what normally goes bad on these motors? Well, hopefully you're just dealing with a face seal, and that's the well, we call it duocone seal or face seal that's right in here. Hopefully that's just leaking and you caught it early, because if that leaks, you know, then you're going to get dirt inside, you're going to ruin your brakes and everything else. And if we get in here and we find too much damage, then it's just not worth rebuilding it. It's better to get just a reman motor, just for, you know, price of parts, I guess. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to check the hub oil and see the condition of the hub oil itself. So the oil's a little black, or just got a little, that's kind of normal. Other than that, the oil looks good. What I'm looking for is to make sure that no metal or anything is pouring out of there. So that tells me that our brake pack is probably good. I don't know what happened to this drive motor. This is just a core that we're rebuilding. So I'm just going to assume that the face seal was leaking. And I guess the question is, can you get away with just doing a face seal? Because you can get the face seal for 250 bucks probably. The whole kit to reseal everything is over $1,000. So hopefully everything else looks good inside and we can just do the face seal. So we're going to go ahead and split this drive motor. We can think of this drive motor in 3 different sections. We've got our distributor section, we've got our rotating group with the thin section right here, and then the rest of it's just our hub and brake section. So we're going to split into 3 pieces, and we're going to work on each piece individually. So we just remove all the bolts from the outer section. And should you mark the case? Well, nah. You don't really have to mark these sections because they're only going to go back together one way if we pay attention. So I don't ever mark the case. But again, the channel is how I did it, not how you should do it. So so this is our distributor section. We'll take and set it off to the side. So first thing, when I pull this rotating group ring off, we just want to look at the inside here and see how smooth it is, make sure there's no damage inside there, and that one looks really good. Now here's our piston assembly. Just comes right off our shaft. And now our hub section. All right, so now that I've got this motor broke down into its 3 sections, you can see there's nothing to be surprised about, nothing fell apart. Your distributor might fall out, which is okay. We're gonna get into that section in a few minutes. The rotating group is all held together with clips and stuff. It shouldn't fall apart, it should be fine. And now we're looking at kind of the hub and the brake section. This is the part that you kind of really want to get to fix that face seal. So in order to take this apart, you will need a press. So right here on this shaft, we've got a retainer ring. It's like a split retainer ring. And what we can do is we can actually press this bearing and we should be able to pull that ring out. But it is perfectly acceptable to use a hammer and screwdriver. And there's a gap in this ring. And what we can do is just hammer that ring apart. There's one half of it. And there's the other half of it. So that's what retains our shaft in the bearings. So we just hammer that out. We've also got a washer right up underneath that. And then I'm going to put this in my hydraulic press and we're just going to press this shaft out of this housing itself. So now that I've pressed that housing apart, we can go ahead and remove our bearing. And hopefully we can reuse our bearings because these bearings are very expensive as well. We can get these online a little cheaper than buying them from like Bobcat or straight from Rexroth. This is an NTN bearing. And probably what we're going to find inside, is an SKF. So for some reason they use NTN branded bearings on the inside, and the outer bearing is SKF. But when I rebuild these, I usually just go SKF. They're a little easier to get here in the States. The NTN, they're expensive, and I usually get them from overseas, and it just takes a while to get them. So I usually replace both bearings with SKF. But this bearing looks good. We'll get it cleaned up, and we can probably reuse that. Again, the whole goal here is to be able to do this by ourselves affordably. If we start replacing brake packs, full seal kit, and bearings, it's just cheaper to go ahead and just get a reman motor at that point. So, okay, so we just pull the bearing out of the way, and now we can just lift our brake section up out of our spindle hub side. Let me finish draining this hub oil. So at this point, we've got the motor broke down into its 4 individual sections. And right here is our face seal. This is the seal we're after. And I don't really see any damage to it. Now we do have a lot of dirt right around where the O-ring goes, but the actual metal type of the face does not appear to be damaged to me. So maybe it's something on the O-ring side. Looking at my brake pack here, the brake pack looks really good, so no damage there either. Looking at my race for the outer bearing, for that SKF bearing that's down right here, the bearing and race and everything look good. I think we're gonna get away with the face seal. So let's pop this face seal out and take a look at what we're dealing with. There's that half. Here's the other half. You can see how big these O-rings are. So this is the face seal that I was telling you about that we can replace for 250 bucks if that's all it is. Now we still need to do a complete tear down because of all the mud and everything around here where these big O-rings fit into that case. We got to clean all that out, all the rust and debris, make sure that's as smooth as possible before we put these together. But see, it's 2 very flat metal surfaces that fit together like this, and this O-ring is the pressure that kind of holds them together, and they rotate on each other, okay? And that's what keeps the dirt and debris out of the motor and keeps the oil in the motor. It's this metal to metal dual cone face seal, and usually that's what we find fail on these motors. But right now I don't see a failure on this motor. I don't know why it was changed, but the face seal looks good. I don't see any damage to the O-rings. You know, we still might have something in our valve or distributor section. We hadn't got into there yet, but everything on this end looks good. So that tells me this is a good motor. We can affordably rebuild this. Now, if our brake pack is damaged out here, it'll probably damage the retainers inside this outer, they call this a spindle section. So we got to pay attention to that, make sure there's no damage in here to the brake retainer on the spindle section. Again, our SKF bearing right here looks really good, so I'm not going to replace that. That's another really expensive bearing. But we are going to have to completely clean all this up. So what I'm going to do is get all that dirt and debris out of here, and I'm going to actually take all these case halves to my machine shop, and I have them run it through their cleaners and get this very, very clean and ready for assembly. But that's all we have to do on the spindle section itself. Now let's get into the brake section and tear the brake section apart. I guess before I tear down the brake section, one thing that I did want to mention on this spindle section, if you do want to replace this bearing, it's very difficult to find a puller that'll get underneath that. So usually what I'll do is I'll just cut this outer cage off with my die grinder, and then I'll actually weld my puller to the inner race and pull it off like that. Just make sure to use something up here so you don't damage the top of your actual spindle shaft. But yeah, don't waste a bunch of time trying to find the right puller. It's hard to find. Just cut it off, weld your puller to it, and pull that inner race off. Just a quick little tip to save you some time and trouble. Now for the brake section, we got the outer brake retainer that we're going to remove. Brake retainer plate. Now this is our brake pack. What I mean by brake pack, it's like a clutch. See all the individual discs? We've got ones with inner tabs on it and one with outer tabs on it, and they just compress together, and that's what holds the inside to the spindle section. That's the brake tabs I was telling you about on the inside. We want to make sure that those aren't damaged. And then you may have shims on there. You notice that shim was down on this side of the brake pack, not the retainer side. And when we put this back together, it'll kind of make sense. I'll show you how we put the brake pack back together. But you know, the reason we're tearing this all the way down is because look at all that dirt. Just tearing it apart, we get this dirt inside, and we got to make sure that all this is perfectly clean before we put it back together. Just a brake spacer. And you might notice this random O-ring here on the outside of the case. This is not on all drive motors. This was actually a change made by Rexroth. They put this on the outside to try to keep that dirt from getting into the face seal. So this O-ring is actually where the spindle portion actually spins on this mounting, I guess this section here. So if you get a new motor and you see this brown O-ring on the outside, don't remove it. It's not a mistake. It's not just there for shipping. It's actually a change by Rexroth to help keep dirt out of that face seal. Get some of this oil out of the drive motor. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and remove this seal because I am doing a full tear down on this, and I'm going to replace this inner seal. So now I want to take my brake piston out itself because I want to make sure to inspect the O-rings on the brake piston. And in order to do that, we've got, it's a snap ring. It's a split style or a spiral style snap ring. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a second. See, it just spirals around. Once I pop it out, I can just kind of wedge it out with my fingers. See that split spiral type snap ring? And that's all it is, holding that brake piston in, but you can't knock the brake piston out until you have this off, so. Now we can flip this upside down, and we've actually got holes in this section, 1, 2, 3. We're going to have to use our punch to push that brake piston out. So not only is it tough or very kind of difficult to push this brake piston out, it's also hard to push it back in. So just keep a note, this is going to take some tapping. This one's actually coming out really easy. This is a Bellevue washer. It's actually the spring that collapses that brake section together. So I guess when you take it apart, this shit's kind of hard to explain, guys, man. I'm doing this for you, so hopefully this is going to help. But you can see that it's tapered up. So when we put that washer back in, we want to make sure the up section is toward the inside, if that makes sense. And then here's our brake assembly. The brake assembly is actually 5 pieces. So we've got 1, 2, 3 pistons, our alignment dials, I guess. They have O-rings on them. And then we have our, I guess our brake pistons themselves. They have O-rings on the outside and here on the inside. Now, whenever I do this, even if I'm doing a face seal, I like to, that's why it's just better just to do a full seal kit. I really like to reseal this brake section. The brake section seals are some of the most important ones in there, because if your brake section leaks by, you're going to get hydraulic oil into your hub section. You're going to blow out your face seal. It's just going to cause problems. So it's not hard to reseal this. I know we're trying to do this as cheap as possible, but sometimes it's just the way it works. So I'm going to split the sections here. Lower section. See, these are those alignment pistons I was telling you about. See, they have O-rings on them at the base and in the center. We want to inspect all these O-rings. Actually, we're just going to replace all these O-rings. And again, I guess before you split this stuff apart, it's probably a good idea to take your phone and maybe just take a picture of how everything goes together. But you've got this video and you're watching me take it apart, so just do everything in reverse to put it back together. But we're going to reseal that brake section. Now, on our brake section, the only thing we have left is the race for the inner and outer bearings. And since I'm going to take this to my machine shop and have it cleaned up and sandblasted on the outside, because this is going to be a full reman, I'm going to go ahead and knock my races out. Now, there's plenty of space inside here. We don't have to damage the races if we're going to reuse our bearings. I've got plenty of lip here to tap out these races. One race goes with that bearing. In our other race. Brake port O-ring. Again, that's why it's better to get a full seal kit so that we can replace those O-rings. And that's it for the brake section. So it's completely tore down. So now my outer spindle section and my brake section are completely torn down, and I'm going to take these to my machine shop and have these actually cleaned up, professionally cleaned and done. It's just, you know, I'm not a professional expert by any means. I just do a lot of drive motors, and it's just better for me to take these and have them professionally cleaned than me trying to do them by myself. They only charge me like 60 bucks or something to go through there. So now let's just focus on the rotating group. Hydraulics are just mind-boggling, to be honest with you. Look at this section. We put it together. This is the rotating group. Look how thin that is. This section, I'm sorry to elaborate on this, but it's mind-boggling. This section is what creates all that torque, all that power. When you're going into a big pile of dirt and you're spinning those tracks underneath you, all that power is being made right here. All the rest of it's just bearings and shafts to transfer that to the rubber. But all that torque and all that power is being made right here in the motor. It's unbelievable. So again, our outer ring, we already talked about that. You know, we've got the seal. These are not necessarily O-rings. I mean, they can be called O-rings, but it's actually a square seal. It's called a square ring. And then another small port O-ring on this section. And that's all there is for the outer section of the rotating group. So should you take the pistons out of the rotating group housing? Well, I do, because I want to make sure there's no contamination, no dirt inside here. And there shouldn't be on this section if, you know, something else in your motor. So if you want to tear this apart, that's completely up to you. There's a snap ring on either side of it. It's that split type ring there. And a washer. Now it's the same for both sides. Now I might mention that in theory you're supposed to have pistons and rollers go back into the rollers, stay with the same piston and the same bore all the way around. So if you tear that down, it's completely, I mean, it's impossible really to mark that, I guess. So I tear it apart. I'm not really concerned about getting them back in the same bore. I've never had an issue with it. But I am going to inspect all the rollers and make sure they're not damaged. And to get these out, we're going to use a little air pressure. This is where your oil enters in to each piston and pushes that piston out, which runs on these waves. When that piston pressure pushes, it's running down that ramp. That's what's creating your power. That's return, power, if that makes sense. Now also, this is where the distributor section rides. This distributor right here rides right on top of that. The seal is the oil, so we got to make sure that this surface is in really good condition. No scratches or no wear on the rotating section where it mounts to the distributor itself. So I want to use my air nozzle. I'm just going to blow into this hole, and that's going to push this piston out. I'll put a rag over it because we usually blow a lot of oil out too, but I'm trying to give you an idea of what's going to happen here. See how it just blew that piston out? There's the piston and roller assembly. There's also a seal right here that we're going to inspect going around this. You can't buy that seal. You got to buy this whole piston and roller section as a pair. So I'm just going to go through and blow out all those. Here they all are. And that's it. That's the full teardown of the rotating section. So far this has been a very straightforward teardown. There's no magic, there's no secrets, there's nothing hard inside this motor. You just have to be familiar with it. So now we're looking at the distributor section itself. Like I said, sometimes this distributor will push out. In this case it did not, which is okay. So right here in the back of the housing, we can see this Allen head pin right here. See how that's a pin? This is an alignment pin for the distributor, and it's important to check the condition of this pin and the hole in the distributor and make sure they're not wore out. I'll show you what I'm talking about. But once we get this pin out, now we can take our punch or screwdriver and just kind of tap our distributor out. Here's our distributor section. We can see a couple of our springs fell out inside, which is okay. So these springs are what pushes pressure against that rotating group. Right there. See, those spin upon each other, and those springs are what puts that downward pressure on that. During assembly, what we'll do is we're going to put grease around these springs and put them in there, and that's what's going to hold them in place for assembly. Now this is a 2-speed distributor. It's taller than the single speed, and in the center here is our 2-speed spool. So this is what allows us to go into 2-speed. So what happens when you go into 2-speed? You remember all the pistons that we had inside here in the rotating group? When we go into 2-speed, we're taking all that flow of oil and we're splitting it between the pistons. So it'll skip this piston, now all that flow goes to this one. Skips this piston, now all that flow goes to this one. So we have more flow to do less work, or I guess it's just split. How can I explain this? So it's skipping basically every other piston, okay? So that's why we got higher speed, because the more flow can move those pistons faster, but it's less torque because, again, we are skipping every other piston. So hopefully that makes sense. That's how the 2-speed works. Every piston would work in single speed. Every other piston works in 2-speed. And like I was saying, this pin here goes into the distributor. That's what locks this distributor in place. And what I want to make sure is that this pin is not wore, or this hole right here is not egg-shaped or oblonged or anything, because this is like a timing pin. They call it an alignment pin. I call it a timing pin, because if this moves a little bit inside the bore, then the timing for those pistons where they go up and down these ramps can get off just a little bit. It's like the timing on your car, right? When we turn in an old distributor car or a distributor in your old car, we want to set that timing. We know how much difference 1 degree of timing can make, and it makes a huge difference on a hydraulic motor as well. So that's why it's important for this pin and this hole to be perfectly, tight, so that it doesn't allow this distributor to turn in the bore and get our timing off for our motor. So that's why the timing pin that we pulled out from right here is important to inspect. I'll go ahead and pull out all my springs so we don't lose one. Now again, this is 2-speed only. We're going to take out our 2-speed spool. Just held in with the snap ring. These things will usually pop right out. I'm going to use air pressure. See, it's like something is hanging up. That is crazy. So I don't know if I just ripped that seal, or if maybe that's the problem with the motor itself. It wouldn't shift into 2-speed because of that damaged seal. I don't know, but usually you just pull that right out. It's not a problem. And then here's our 2-speed spool itself. So spring, spool, and piston for the 2-speed. And that's it really for the distributor section. Now on the 2-speed, that's all we've got is that 2-speed spool. So that may have been the problem with our motor. I don't know. All right, now on our distributor section, each part of this distributor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seals. Is that right? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 5 seals on the 2-speed. Those seals are found down in here. So it's a inside backup O-ring with an outer seal. So I will replace all of those when I rebuild this. So to finish the tear down on the distributor section, all we got to do is get out our replenishing valve and our spool. So you just see there's 2 plugs right here on this motor. Plug with an O-ring. So here's what that little poppet looks like. You know, we got the plug that we took out. We've got a spring. And there's also a tiny washer. If you can see that, we don't want to lose that washer. So I like to go ahead and clean these parts. Again, an O-ring on the plug that we're going to replace. But I'm going to check the seat on here, make sure there's no debris or scratches on that seat. All that looks good. So I like to bag these parts so that we don't lose anything. So again, another spool, spring, washer, and cap. Bag it and tag it. So another thing I like to do is I like to pull my serial number plate off before I can take it to the machine shop, so that my serial number plate does not get damaged. And they're just glued on to the housing itself. And what I'll do is I'll keep that. So I like to keep my serial number with all my parts, and that way that I know which motor I'm working on. And then I always keep the rest of the housing and everything else together as well. But that's all there is to tearing down the distributor section. I am going to just remove these seals on the inside, and then all of this goes to my machine shop to have it cleaned, sandblasted, and inspected. So that's it for the teardown. Hopefully that helped a little bit. In the next video, we're going to put one together. I've already got one ready to go for a 650 that we're going to put back together, but again, identical to the 590. Is going to be the same thing. So jump on to the next video here, and hopefully it'll be up really soon to show you how to do the rebuild on this motor.